Welcome to the debate. The most dangerous grandiosity doesn't announce itself with a megaphone. It actually hides behind a mask of intense vulnerability, shyness, and chronic victimhood.
Right, which completely upends the traditional image we all have of the loud, boastful narcissist holding court in the center of the room.
Exactly. Today we are investigating the subtle, chilling behavioral patterns of covert narcissism. And coming at this from the perspective of behavioral profiling, my stance is clear. Covert narcissism is a highly calculated predatory strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It is a system where perceived weakness is actively weaponized to extract power, control, and narcissistic supply from unsuspecting targets.
Misses the true danger. To truly understand this dynamic, we must break down the devastating, reality-distorting emotional toll these subtle manipulation tactics inflict on the victim.
Okay.
The psychological destruction of the victim's reality is ultimately what makes this pathology so uniquely destructive.
Well, let's get right into the foundation of that predatory strategy. When we analyze covert narcissists, we are fundamentally looking at predators who mask their underlying entitlement under an introverted, often depressed, or highly self-deprecating persona.
Right, they play the martyr.
Exactly. They utilize chronic victimhood and martyrdom as their primary survival strategy. They consistently position themselves as the wronged party in every conceivable situation. No matter what happens at work, in their family, or in a relationship, someone else is always to blame, and they have sacrificed so much for so little appreciation.
Which is exactly what makes it so hard to identify from the outside.
Because it mimics genuine emotional sensitivity. But it isn't. It is a highly precise mechanism designed to gain power and evade accountability without taking the social risks associated with overt, demanding behavior. Wait, look at how they use pity to establish that dynamic in the first place.
Oh, the sob stories.
Right. They utilize the sob story with absolute precision to hook their target. They share these elaborate, beautifully tragic narratives about how they have been wronged or overlooked by the world. And the target is drawn in, thinking they are connecting with someone who is just deeply wounded and in need of love.
Yeah.
But this is an extraction method. That's not depression. That's weaponized guilt. It positions the narcissist as the eternal victim, which means the other person is automatically assigned the role of the caretaker.
This is exactly what trips victims up. They aren't falling for a calculated trap because they are foolish or weak. They are falling for it because the narcissist is exploiting their highest human quality, their genuine empathy.
Right. But the
victim sees pain and responds with care. But when that care is turned against them, the cognitive dissonance is just agonizing. It is a slow-drip psychological poison.
But that cognitive dissonance is engineered. It's a deliberate tactic to ensure they remain immune to criticism. I mean, if they are the ultimate victim, you can never be mad at them.
You call it a deliberate tactic, but I want to look at the devastating effect that has on the victim's nervous system. Let's talk about DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. This isn't just a tactic, it is an invisible psychological assault.
Sure.
Let's walk through what this actually looks like in a living room on a Tuesday night. A partner finally gathers the courage to raise a legitimate concern. Maybe they say, hey, it really hurt my feelings when you made that joke about my career in front of our friends.
A completely reasonable boundary to set.
Right. But the covert narcissist cannot handle the perceived criticism. So first they deny. I never said that. You're completely misremembering the conversation. Then they attack. You're always so overly sensitive. You just love to start fights out of nowhere.
Classic.
And then the fatal blow. They reverse victim and offender. I cannot believe you are attacking me right now after the incredibly stressful week I've had. I guess I'm just the worst partner in the world. I can never do anything right.
And suddenly the conversation has completely flipped.
Exactly. The partner who raised a totally valid, gentle concern is suddenly apologizing for making the narcissist feel bad. They are comforting the person who just insulted them. The victim is systematically made to feel like the abuser. That inversion of reality is profoundly dangerous. It rewires the victim's nervous system. They stop trusting their own gut. They internalize the belief that they are the toxic one.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how Darvo and that inversion of reality actually operate mechanically. Because to truly stop falling for it, we have to recognize that it relies on a very specific, calculated phrase library.
Okay, how so?
It's not just an emotional reflex, right? It's a language of passive aggression and micro-insults that constitute covert gaslighting. The covert narcissist doesn't usually scream insults at you. That would leave a trace. Instead, they use disguised criticism and backhanded compliments.
Give me an example of what that sounds like on a daily basis.
They say things like, "You're pretty smart for someone who didn't go to a top-tier college." Or they'll cross a known boundary and casually say, "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. You're usually so easygoing." Or my personal favorite, the weaponized sigh when you ask them to do a basic chore.
Ah, yes.
These micro-insults are incredibly calculated bids for dominance that leave absolutely no fingerprints. Because if the victim reacts, if they get angry or hurt, the narcissist can just throw their hands up and claim they were just joking or trying to help. It triggers the Darvo response you mentioned, but the calculation is paramount here. It's a dominance hierarchy being established completely under the radar.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. By insisting on this hyper-focus on calculation, you are granting the covert narcissist a level of conscious, mastermind intentionality that I think actually validates their own grandiosity.
I wouldn't say mastermind.
But they aren't James Bond villains sitting in a dark room plotting these exact micro-insults on a whiteboard. They are reacting instinctively from a place of deep, pathological envy and a highly fragile self-structure. But more importantly, whether they calculate it consciously or not, the intent does not matter to the person on the receiving end. The result is what matters.
And you define that result as covert gaslighting.
Yes, and let's really break down what that result feels like. The victim experiences a partner with a highly selective, almost delusional memory. Conversations the victim clearly remembers are flat out denied or completely reframed to make the victim look crazy.
Right.
"I never said that," or "You're taking it totally out of context," or "Why are you always trying to make me out to be the bad guy?" The result of these constant micro-invalidations is profound, bone-deep emotional exhaustion. We are talking about partners and family members constantly typing covert narcissist traits into search engines at 2 a.m., desperate to find a language for the insanity they are experiencing.
It's incredibly common.
The victim loses their identity. They stop trusting their own memory. They start secretly recording conversations on their phone just to prove to themselves that they aren't losing their minds. In the clinical space, we call this crazy-making. When you focus solely on whether the narcissist calculated the insult to establish a dominance hierarchy, you miss the terrifying fact that the victim is literally losing their grip on reality.
That's an interesting point. Though I would frame it differently. I'm not suggesting they are a comic book villain. The calculation can absolutely be a deeply ingrained, unconscious defense mechanism, but it is a mechanism of predatory extraction nonetheless.
Right, but
It functions like a predator stalking prey, whether the predator is philosophizing about it or just acting on instinct. And if we want to understand why they gaslight and rewrite reality so aggressively, we have to look directly at the core of their pathology. We have to understand the concept of narcissistic mortification.
which is usually the turning point in these relationships.
Exactly. Mortification is the primitive terror a narcissist feels when their fragile, grandiose self-image is punctured. Let me give you an analogy. Think of a deep-sea creature down in the pitch black at crushing oceanic depths. Its body makes perfect sense. It is structurally sound for that specific environment. But if you drag that creature up to the surface, into the light, the sudden lack of pressure causes it to literally explode. It loses all structural integrity. That is narcissistic mortification, when their meticulously crafted victim persona is dragged into the light of accountability. When they are exposed, criticized, or denied their special status, they don't just feel sad or embarrassed. They feel a sense of psychological annihilation.
A total collapse of the ego.
Precisely. And this collapse triggers the shame-rage spiral. Because they physically and psychologically cannot tolerate the intense shame of their defective self, they immediately externalize it into rage. But here's where the covert narcissist differs from the overt narcissist.
It's quieter.
Much quieter.
In the covert presentation, this rage isn't always explosive. It doesn't look like shouting and throwing plates. It goes completely cold. It manifests as the silent treatment. It manifests as the sudden total withdrawal of affection as a calculated punishment.
Yeah.
They create an emotional vacuum. They will walk past you in the hallway like you are a ghost. They starve the victim of emotional connection, sometimes for days or weeks, until the victim cracks and begs for forgiveness for an offense they didn't even commit. By extracting that apology, the narcissist restores their power and neutralizes the mortification.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered what this mortification actually feels like on the receiving end? You describe a fascinating internal psychological process. The terror of the punctured grandiosity, the deep-sea creature exploding. But to the partner or the child of this person, it doesn't look like an internal psychological crisis.
What does it look like?
It looks like a terrifying lack of basic human empathy. It feels like you have suddenly ceased to exist in their eyes. The chronic anxiety of managing this incredibly fragile ego is devastating. You literally live your life walking on eggshells.
Because you never know what's going to trigger the collapse.
Exactly. You know that if you use the slightly wrong tone of voice, or offer even mild constructive feedback, or simply ask for a basic relational need to be met, you might trigger this catastrophic mortification. So what does the victim do? You stop asking. You shrink your own needs.
Right.
You make yourself smaller and smaller to accommodate their fragility. The relationship becomes entirely one-sided, lacking any reciprocity, because absolutely all the oxygen in the room is consumed by the narcissist's desperate need to avoid feeling shame.
And that dynamic, that exact feeling of shrinking yourself, is precisely why recognizing the underlying predatory mechanics is essential for the victim's survival. If you don't understand that the silent treatment is actually a defense against their own shame-induced mortification, you might actually believe their narrative.
You blame yourself.
Yes. You might believe that you really did do something wrong to deserve being treated like a ghost. You might fall for their weaponized incompetence when they intentionally fail to do basic household tasks and then act victimized and helpless when you get frustrated.
Oh, the incompetence is so frustrating.
It is. But when you can clearly see the predatory mechanism for what it is, this withdrawal of affection designed solely to extract an apology for an offense they won't even name, you can finally stop participating in the game. You realize their internal scorecard is completely rigged.
But seeing the mechanism isn't enough to heal the trauma. Knowing why the predator bites doesn't heal the wound, and it doesn't stop the bleeding. That brings us to how a victim actually survives, protects their sanity, and ultimately escapes this dynamic.
Okay?
You cannot reason with narcissistic mortification. You cannot love them out of their shame-rage cycle. Your empathy will not fix them. It will only deplete you. The only viable methods for the victim to protect their emotional energy involve radical, often painful behavioral changes on their end. We talk in therapy about the gray rock method.
Which is one of the most effective countermeasures.
It is, but it's excruciating to execute. You have to make yourself as uninteresting and emotionally unresponsive as a literal gray rock. You give brief, factual, neutral answers. Yes, no, okay.
Right.
When they launch a micro-insult to fish for a reaction and soothe their wounded ego, you give them absolutely nothing to work with. You have to actively starve them of the narcissistic supply they are trying to extract from you.
And I completely agree on the utility of gray rock. But notice how that actually proves my point about their fundamentally predatory nature.
How so?
Well, a predator hunts for movement, for a reaction. If you stop reacting, the covert narcissist loses their leverage. They thrive on emotional responses, whether those are positive affirmations of their victimhood or negative, defensive arguments. Any emotional reaction tells them they have power over you.
That's true.
This is why putting them on an information diet where you share absolutely nothing about your personal struggles, your joys, your fears, or your successes is essential, because anything you share is just future ammunition.
Yeah.
They will catalog your vulnerabilities and keep them in their back pocket, only to use them during their next shame-rage spiral to deflect accountability and hurt you.
And implementing an information diet in gray rock in a marriage or with a parent is incredibly painful, because it means accepting the grim reality
that you cannot have a genuine, reciprocal human relationship with this person.
It's a huge loss.
It is. It is exhausting to counsel victims through this because it goes against every single human instinct to connect, to communicate, and to resolve conflict. Setting firm boundaries with a covert narcissist will absolutely be met with intense guilt trips, more Darvo, or cold rage.
Mm-hmm.
The victim has to learn that their boundary isn't a negotiation. It is an ironclad wall, and they have to build a support system completely outside the narcissist's sphere of influence, which brings up another layer of this nightmare.
The public persona.
Yes, the covert narcissist is almost always maintaining a flawless public image. To the rest of the world, they are the quiet, humble, self-deprecating community volunteer. They are the nice guy or the sweet, suffering mother.
Right.
Only the partner or the child sees the cold, vindictive, gaslighting behavior behind closed doors. That creates a profound sense of isolation. When a victim finally tries to speak out, people look at them like they're crazy and say, "Them? But they're so sensitive and quiet. You must be misunderstanding things." That isolation is the final, most devastating layer of the abuse.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning. Not about the isolation itself, but because you are framing that isolation as just an unfortunate byproduct of their public persona. I argue that the isolation is a primary, calculated objective.
Okay, but
By maintaining that distinct split image, the humble suffering martyr in public and the punishing cold tyrant in private, they actively ensure the victim has nowhere to turn. It is a brilliant dual-layered defense mechanism.
it's definitely complex.
If the victim complains, the narcissist's meticulously crafted public persona acts as a predefined shield. That isn't an accident. It is a highly evolved interpersonal strategy. Understanding the covert narcissist requires piercing through that shy, victimized exterior to recognize the deeply entitled, vindictive, and manipulative core beneath. It is a predatory structure built on fragile grandiosity.
The structure is incredibly complex, yes. But healing from it requires a complete shift in focus away from analyzing that structure. The victim must stop trying to manage the narcissist's fragility. They have to stop trying to decode the micro-insults or contort themselves to prevent the next mortification.
Right.
Healing requires the victim to finally trust their own perceptions again. When they are told a conversation didn't happen, they have to validate their own reality. When they are accused of being the abuser, they have to recognize the projection for what it is. They have to establish those ironclad boundaries and truly grieve the fact that the sensitive, wounded person they thought they could save was actually a mirage masking an empty, unyielding core.
Well, we have approached this from vastly different angles, but I believe we have arrived at a very clear point of convergence. Both the predatory behavioral mechanics I've detailed and the psychological fragmentation of reality you've outlined point to the exact same conclusion.
Which is?
This specific presentation of narcissism is uniquely destructive precisely because of its subtlety. It mimics genuine sensitivity. It weaponizes the very best traits of the victim, their empathy, their desire to help, their willingness to self-reflect, and turns those beautiful traits into tools for extraction and control.
Exactly. Looking at both the calculated tactics of the abuser and the traumatic, disorienting impact on the victim provides a complete 360-degree picture of this dynamic.
Absolutely.
The literature on personality disorders is vast, and there is certainly much more to explore regarding how these attachment styles and developmental wounds intersect in relationships. But recognizing the chilling patterns we've discussed today, validating the exhaustion and the reality of the victim is the critical first step for anyone caught in this web.
The most dangerous grandiosity doesn't announce itself with a megaphone. It whispers, it sighs, and it convinces you that you are the one holding the megaphone.